Hello everyone, we are here today with Stefano Mallia, which is our colleague from Malta. It's the president of the employers of the Economic and Social Committee in Brussels, so it's a very important and good representative of European entrepreneurs, and it's a pleasure to having him here today with us and to participate. We are so grateful to you to participate here in our project of interview that we call Dialogues in Proximity, which Dialogues is the crucial word that we use to explain how our companies work. So thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me, that's for sure.
So it's a pleasure to have you here. First question, we would like to talk to you. How do you see the European business sector and the European entrepreneurs in this specific moment when we are in, we can say saying bye-bye to the COVID crisis and now becoming, this resilience and this very important moment for our companies.
Yes. Well, there is no doubt that we have moved from one very complicated situation, which was COVID, to another, I would say, almost even more complicated situation where we have the war in Ukraine and the things that are happening around it. European companies are at the moment facing difficult situation in terms of high inflation, in terms of high interest rates, energy costs, difficult labor market, shortages of raw materials. So clearly the situation is a difficult one. And therefore, it's in our interest, in the interest of your organization, and in the interest of the European Employers Group and the European Economic and Social Committee, to as much as possible ensure that decisions being taken, or at national level in your case, or in our case at European level, are aimed at helping European companies to, let's say, overcome this particularly difficult period. So, one of the clearly, when you look at the winter forecast, which has just been published by the European Commission, the situation from a macroeconomic point of view seems to be slightly better than expected. But as we are mentioning, there are a lot of what we call headwinds, which could easily change the situation into a negative one, because at the moment the growth, if I'm not mistaken, forecasted by the European Commission is of 0.8% for the EU as a whole and 0.9% for the euro area. So it is still a very delicate and fluid situation. And because of this, what we are saying as the Employers Group is that we are saying this to the European Commission, to the European Parliament and to the Council, is that we need to put competitiveness at the center of all our actions. Unfortunately, Felipe, my view is that for the past few years, enterprises have been taken for granted. It's as if whatever happens, enterprises will always be there to provide us with jobs, with growth, etc. But the reality on the ground is we can see is that when we compare with our competitors in the US or in Asia, we are not doing so well, either because of costs or because of lack of innovation, investment in innovation, this kind of thing. So clearly we need to refocus on competitiveness. I mean, the last time we had, when I say we as a European Union, we had a vision or a strategy on which encompassed competitiveness was in 2010. We had the Lisbon strategy agenda. So clearly this doesn't make sense that an entity which is built on economic growth, on economic success, does not even have a vision for competitiveness. So this is certainly what we are pushing. We need to focus on our competitiveness.
We have an important year in front of us, 2023. This one in Europe we are going to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the single market, which is one of the most important politics for companies. And I am the rapporteur of the opinion that we are working together at the ESC. How do you see this year? How do you think for our companies it could be an opportunity to improve this single market in order to allow this competitiveness that we were talking about?
Yes, certainly, as you rightly say, the single market, I describe the single market as being let's say, the main jewel of the European Union. No? I would say that it is central to our success and even to the existence of the European Union, in the sense that our strength, both with all the member states, but also with other trade partners. And I know that external trade, of course, is very important, especially with Latin America, for example, is important for Spain, also lies with the success of the single market. So we need to, number one, ensure that single market does function well. We still have a number of barriers, legislative or non-legislative barriers, which continue to hinder the functioning of the single market. And we therefore need to make an effort to reduce bureaucracy, because we sometimes have situations where countries go over and above what is required. For example, I understand that there has been some new legislation introduced, I believe in Spain and in France, which prohibits certain retail alliances, which, frankly speaking, can only bring benefits to consumers. And this is, to us, is the kind of gold plating which we are against. As I was mentioning earlier on, when you compare our enterprises in general with our counterparts, first of all, when you look at the GDP of the European Union vis-a-vis the global GDP, we were, I think, at 25% in 1990, and we have gone down now to 17%. So clearly we are losing ground, and this ground has been taken up mainly by Asia and specifically by China. So this is number one. Number two, also, when you look at the US, you see that our companies are growing much slower than the companies in the US, and we are investing much less, I think 40% less in innovation when you compare to what is happening in the US. So clearly these are areas where we need to do more. Skills, for example. Skills, we all, at the moment, Europe is facing a situation of a very tight labor market, be it in terms of provision of skills, but even in terms of manpower. And this is where we also need to address, because without the manpower, without the skills, we are not going to be able to continue to grow and be competitive vis-a-vis our competitors. So these are all areas where we believe that we need to be much stronger. Now, the European Commission has just recently launched the Green Deal industrial policy, okay, which in some manner is in response to the Inflation Reduction Act of the United States. There are some good points, because it mentions in terms of innovation, for example, in terms of skills. But, for example, the focus seems to be only on what we call clean tech industries. And to us, that is a mistake, because we need to ensure that we bring forth all our industries. Those which are clean tech today, of course, we'll make them greener and greener, because I think we are all agreed that we need to move on this green transition, but also we need to move on to digital transition. So these are all areas where I believe, in terms of the single market and competitiveness of companies, that we can improve.
And what about the both Swedish and Spanish presidencies of the Council that we will have this year? What do you expect from that?
Well, first and foremost, what I would like to say is that as the employers group, we were involved in this initiative, or this, let's call it, exercise, which was launched by the Commission, the Council and the Parliament, called the Future Conference on the Future of Europe, which in reality was not one conference, but was a number of meetings and focus groups and consultations with citizens, but also with social partners. And we were part of this consultation. When I say we, as the employers group. And we had put forward a particular idea, which was that any new legislation which would be coming in would need to go through a competitiveness check, i.e. we would look at a suggested new piece of legislation and see how it impacts the competitiveness of our companies. And this, whilst initially rejected by the trade unions and not so enthusiastic response from the Commission, now suddenly the Commission has said it is going to take it on, and we see also in the Swedish presidency that it is also part of officially of their program. So, and also when you look at the program of the Swedish presidency, you see that competitiveness is central to the work that it wants to do in terms of energy, in terms of raw materials, in terms of skills. These are all areas where the Swedish presidency, and we believe strongly that the agenda of the Swedish presidency and the agenda of us as employers is pretty much similar. So we are clear that we can work. In terms of the Spanish presidency, it is also very clear that there will be a number of social policy issues which it would like to take on and it would like to promote. However, we are also engaging with the Spanish presidency to take on also the issue of competitiveness, because competitiveness is not an issue which is temporary. It is not an issue which belongs only to employers or to the Swedes, to the Swedish presidency, but it is something which we need to continue working on as we go along. And therefore, we need to look at, for example, when we look at our critical raw materials, how vulnerable are we in terms of critical raw materials? When we talk about strategic autonomy, what are we saying? That we will not depend on anyone outside of the EU? I frankly think it's impossible. But we need to ensure that if there are certain critical raw materials, for example, that we have partnerships with reliable countries and democratic countries. So these are, I would expect, however, for example, the Spanish presidency also to focus very much on trade and specifically on Latin America. There we have a number of agreements which are either in place and still need to come on board, still need to start functioning, or indeed some trade agreements which need to be concluded. So these are all areas, again, and that external trade is really important for us, when I say for us, EU as a whole, because it is an area where we can continue to grow.
Mm-hmm. Here at the Spanish Entrepreneur Association in COE, we are working so much during last months and years, I would say, about the quality of legislation and the institutional quality, which is sometimes impacting negatively in our competitiveness. What do you think are the main tasks in this area? What can we do, or what can be improved on that?
I think, Felipe, I think it's very much what I mentioned earlier on in terms of, first of all, we can't keep on adding on legislative burdens for companies. I mean, when you look at even, for example, the compliance regulation, the reporting regulation, these are things which have become heavier and heavier and heavier, and they are suffocating enterprise, number one. Number two, also, we need to simplify our regulatory framework, even, for example, in permitting. When it comes to permitting, we are not saying that we should not take into consideration the environmental aspects, but we need to be faster. We cannot have a major investment in an energy, for example, supplier of tens of millions or hundreds of millions, and it takes 18, 20 months to get an answer as to whether the permit will be issued or not, because we are going to lose the investment. So even in terms of innovation, we need to make it easier for companies to invest in innovation. Otherwise, we will lose our companies to the competition. The United States is putting in hundreds of billions of dollars in terms of subsidies towards the green industries, and we will lose. Apart from the subsidies, the US also has cheap energy, and therefore, if we are not careful, we will see a deindustrialization of Europe. So this is something which we need to work on as well.
What about our sector? We represent retail and wholesale companies, which are. We think this is a very, very important sector for the European economy. We are talking about 20% of the GDP and millions of employees, but we are convinced here in Spain that this sector doesn't occupy at institutional level, the level that corresponds to that. What do you think about that?
Yes, I would agree that the sector or the industry of retail does not tend to take the visibility which I think it deserves. I mean, we are talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, Felipe, but I think 5 million companies in your area. We're talking about hundreds of millions of euros in terms of turnover, if not trillions. And so far, and as yet, it does not have the visibility that other sectors will have, do have at the moment in terms of discussions between the EU institutions. So certainly, I think there is need for an effort there to raise the profile of the sector, and clearly the sector is facing some, I would say, challenges, or we call them mega trends in terms when it comes to demographic, when it comes to e-commerce, when it comes to sustainability in terms of packaging, plastics, and etc. And these are things which the industry has to address, because if the industry does not, the sector does not, then it's going to fall behind, or indeed you will lose operators in your area. So these are areas which I firmly believe the sector needs to work on. But clearly it is a sector which is very important in terms also of employment, and needs to raise its level also in terms of impact with the EU institutions.
Let's talk about the Economic and Social Committee. Let's talk about the work that we do there and how can we help and support European entrepreneurs with the job that we do there.
I think what is immediately worth pointing out is the fact that the European Economic and Social Committee is, number one, established by the formal treaties of the European Union. So we are a formal structure within the EU institutional framework. That's number one. So, number two, because of this setup and because of what there is in the treaties, I would say on a large majority of new legislation, before it comes into force, the Commission and the Parliament must consult with us. So if there is legislation on packaging, if there is legislation on transport, if there is legislation on environment, if there is legislation on competition, okay, areas which maybe impact your sector, before they become actually directives or regulations, they have to come to us, and the committee, which is made up of 3 groups, which is employers, trade unions, and civil society, have to give their views, their point of views on this proposed new legislation, and even suggest ways and means of improving it. Now, what I think the value added that our committee has is that it is made up of members who do not live or function only in Brussels, but they also have interests back home. You yourself, you are here in Madrid, I myself back in my country in Malta, and we live the everyday challenges of businesses. For example, I myself, I am a partner in a firm of 65 people in the financial services. And I know every day the challenges we face with regulation, for example. And then we bring this practical experience to Brussels, to the policymaker, and our value added is in terms of making sense that the legislation takes care also of the interests of companies. Not only, but also takes care of the interests of companies. So there, I think that is our primary role. The secondary role also is of bringing information back home. So once you are in Brussels, you are discussing new legislation, and you come back to your organization and you tell your members, listen, this is where the legislation is going, these are the trends or the direction where it is, where Europe is heading. We need to cater for this. Let's start thinking how we're going to put in new strategies of growth, new strategies of sustainability, etc. So I see it on a 2-channel. Our primary work is with the EU institutions, sensibilizing the EU institutions to the realities of business. And the second channel is sensibilizing our members, organizations back home to what is coming from Brussels.
So I think we can stop here. I just would like to say thank you again, Stefano, for being here with us, spend this little time with us. It's been a real pleasure to receive you here in our headquarters, we could say, in Madrid. And we just would like to wish you a very nice stance here in Spain. And I think we all know that it's a country that you like. So thank you very much again. And
thank you for the invitation. And of course, I trust and hope that we will have a good and strong Spanish presidency. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for you.